Is everybody here? Then we'll begin. Hello, and welcome to another episode of Torn Book Club. I am Josh, also known as Sarumann, your host, and today we are going to be talking about our favorite and least favorite books that we read in school, since this is back to school month. And hello, everybody. Everybody in the chat is now saying hi to me. And so September is back to school month, and as such, our book of the month for September is The Giver by Lois Lowry. I hope some of you are reading this. I Stole the One Ring mentioned that she started reading it and is totally into it, which is awesome. I read it not too long ago and really enjoyed it. I never read it in school because it was a little bit past my time. But yeah, I really enjoyed it, and I just learned that it is actually the first of a 4-book series. So there's actually more to it. So I may pick those up at some point. I'd like to see where it goes from beyond that. But so today, with back to school month, I put out a little bit of a feeler on social media, on Facebook and Twitter, asking people what they thought their favorite or their favorite books, or the books that stuck with them the most from school, what those were. And I got a lot of really good responses on Facebook, on Twitter, and in email. And so I'm going to go through some of those, and you feel free to chime in, and I'm going to be giving my comments on them as well. So let's go to the Twitter first. I got a couple there. And I Stole the One Ring is already finished The Giver. Awesome. And Aravandi is saying I replied with Kidnapped, and yes, I did see that. I'm looking at that on the Twitter right now, saying I loved Kidnapped by Robert Louis Stevenson in 9th grade. My least favorite was either Julius Caesar or Macbeth. Now, I've read Julius Caesar and Macbeth. Probably neither one of them are my favorite of Shakespeare's plays, but totally understand where you're coming from there. I never read Kidnapped when I was in school. That's one that never got assigned to me, unfortunately. I've read Treasure Island, which I loved a great deal, and I've always meant to read Kidnapped, but one day I will get to it. I've got a very large to-read list now, thanks to this show. And I love that, and I'm going through that as quickly as I can. We got another one from Shelby Olson, saying I couldn't get enough of Beowulf my senior year. A Tale of Two Cities was another favorite, and I hated The Great Gatsby. Aravandi is saying I mentioned Julius Caesar in my tweet, and now I'm being followed by a Julius Caesar parody account. It's funny how that happens. And we got an anonymous Ustreamer. Hello. Temple says, I think Shakespeare is often taught wrong in schools. It should really be taught from a theatrical perspective rather than a literature perspective. I agree with that. There is a certain way that most people teach Shakespeare in school that I don't entirely agree with, because it's mostly breaking down meter and time and looking at it from a very technical aspect, and the storytelling only seems to come in towards the end as an afterthought. At least that was my take on it when I was in school. We got a couple newbies here. We got Rocket Hobbit, I think, has been here before, and Rocket, you didn't miss much. We only just started. Palmer C is a new person. My favorite series as a kid was Anne of Green Gables. I've never read Anne of Green Gables. I've heard that it's very good. I watched a little bit of the TV series, or was it a mini series? And Again, like All Creatures Great and Small, it wasn't something that I thought would appeal to me, so maybe I should give Anne of Green Gables a shot, because I loved All Creatures Great and Small. Rovander is saying, "Oh, I've been taught about Shakespeare by some guy who had been a Shakespeare actor in school in the UK. If I remember right, he had a horrible temper, but he taught a lot." That's cool. Ava is saying, "My favorites were Pride and Prejudice and Lord of the Flies. The least favorite was a Hemingway book." I'm gonna have to go with you on that one, Ava. The only Hemingway book that I read in school was The Old Man and the Sea, which was, I found to be incredibly tiresome, and I know there are probably people out there who will just bash me mercilessly for saying that, but I didn't care for it, I'll be honest. That isn't to say that I don't like Hemingway overall as a writer. I just didn't find The Old Man and the Sea a very engaging story. And of course, everybody's saying Pride and Prejudice is awesome, and that is another that's on my to-read list. So back to the tweets here. I got a lot of people saying that they loved Beowulf when they were in school. I hope that you were able to watch our Beowulf episode about a month ago with Kelly Rice. I thought it was very informative. And she also says, and Shelby Olsen also says, "I hated The Great Gatsby," and I'm gonna have to go with you on that one too. I did not like The Great Gatsby at all. Again, I'm probably going to get some people bashing me for saying that, but I personally did not care for The Great Gatsby. I found it too indulgent. It was trying so hard to make a parody of that culture, and I mean, none of the characters were likable in it. And I know that was Fitzgerald's purpose, was to make a story about these very vapid characters, and sort of make a commentary on that lifestyle. But when you're trying to tell a whole story about those characters, it just becomes tiresome, especially when I couldn't relate to any of them. What is Rocket saying? "I was mad into Robin Hood as well." Yes, I loved Robin Hood when I was a kid. Still do love Robin Hood, and just watched this week's episode of Doctor Who where they did Robin Hood, and it was interesting. If you haven't watched it, I won't go into spoilers about it. It was an okay episode, probably not my favorite, but it was good. Aonway says, "The first book that really impressed me was one I had to read in school. To Kill a Mockingbird changed my life." Yes, To Kill a Mockingbird is just, I can't say enough good things about To Kill a Mockingbird. It was a great story, engaging, great commentary, very emotionally charged, and I just loved that one from start to finish. What is it? Aravandi saying, "I'm trying to remember more of the books I had to read for school, but there were so many." And yeah, I know most of us had to read lots and lots of books in school, and I don't expect us all to remember all of them. I certainly don't remember all the ones I read, but I wanted to at least talk about the ones that stuck with us. So let's go to the Facebook, and because I got a lot of comments there, so let's just start at the top here with Light of the King. Well, I've blocked out a lot of school books since reading was such a challenge due to my dyslexia. However, the ones that stayed with me were The Hobbit, Narnia, Wrinkle in Time, and then in high school it was Cat's Cradle, The Outsiders, and Night by Elie Wiesel. I've read some of those. I mean, Hobbit and Narnia, of course. Never read Night, unfortunately, and I feel like that's one that I definitely should read. Another one that I sort of felt like I missed the boat on was A Wrinkle in Time. That one was never assigned to me in school, and I feel like that was a real shame. It sounds like it's a book that I would enjoy, and I've always been meaning to read it. So, another one for the to read list. Let's see. The chat is blowing up here. Temple is saying it's funny how many books usually assigned in school that I read on my own were some of the ones that she read on her own were To Kill a Mockingbird, all of Jane Austen, and The Diary of Anne Frank. Yeah. And a lot of those are pretty much staples of school reading. And yeah, they're all really good books, and I think, like, had I not been assigned them, I probably would have picked them up eventually. Rocket is saying everything by Cornelia Funk, like Inkheart, Dragon Rider, and The Thief Lord. I haven't read any of those. I've heard that they're good. And Christina Comiskey, I hope I'm pronouncing that right, mentions a couple of the other mainstays, Lord of the Flies, Animal Farm, and The Grapes of Wrath. And she says that she passionately hates The Grapes of Wrath. I can understand that. I read it a long time ago, and it was probably, I was too young to fully understand it when I did read it. But I thought it was an interesting look into that world, and into the Dust Bowl and Depression kind of life. And it stuck with me because it was such a bleak and sad story. I don't know if I would say that it's one of my favorites, but I found it interesting and somewhat relatable. Lord of the Flies and Animal Farm, definitely some of the mainstays. Everybody's talking about Inkheart now. So, yeah, Paul Merci says Jane Eyre has always been a favorite. I still have not read Jane Eyre. There are definitely a lot of classics that I have not yet read that I need to, and I'm making my way through a lot of that. Temple says my teacher had told us on our last day of studying the book that we'd have a speaker who was in one of the Siberian work camps. I should point out, Temple was talking about a book called A Day in the Life of Ivan Vasilovich, which was about the Siberian work camps in Russia, which is very interesting. I actually have never heard of that book, but now I really want to check that out, because I do have ancestral connections to Siberia. So let's see, what are some of the others? Johnny Tremaine is another one that people talk about, and I liked it. I thought it was a fairly simple story, but I'm a big fan, or I'm a big student of American history, and particularly of the Revolution, and so a story like Johnny Tremaine was totally right up my alley, and I really loved it. What happened here? Oh, the chat just like shot up here. Okay. Rocket Hobbit is saying, funnily enough, I didn't read The Hobbit until after I got to Lord of the Rings at age 14. Now we all get to it how we get to it. There's no particular reason that you need to read The Hobbit first and then Lord of the Rings. I mean, that was how they were published. That's that's how they are chronologically. But you do what you get to books how you get to them. Uh, let's see. Paul Merci is saying, I've just started reading Agnes Grey by Anna Bronte, and I love it so much I am reading it sparingly, but it will last longer. So it will last longer. That's cool. Haven't read that one. I'm glad you're enjoying it. Uh, let's see. What are some of the others? It's like we got a lot of big ones, a lot of big posts here on Facebook. A lot of Beowulf, um, and a lot of let's see here. Lord of the Flies was mentioned a few times. And Aonway is asking the question, how do you guys feel about The Catcher in the Rye? I suppose that is a book quite popular in schools. Um, I don't know how any of you feel about The Catcher in the Rye. I read it in school, and I have to say that um, I personally did not care for it. Um, it wasn't one of my favorites. I can see why it would appeal to many people, because it is about like disaffected youth, um, but I also felt that it was too dour, and I always try to be a generally positive person, so reading a book that was just really about this kid who didn't like his life and didn't really understand anything and was trying to find his way in the world. I understand that struggle. Um, but for me, it doesn't make for very compelling storytelling. Um, but that's me. Uh, and what is Temple is saying? I think for the most part, I like reading. Ah. At school, Aravandi says at school I got to choose a lot of the books I got to read. They just told me which genre to choose from. That's cool. Um, I never quite had that freedom when I was in school. I did have one teacher in sixth grade who basically the entire semester gave us nothing but sci-fi books to read, and it was awesome. And that's where I read 1984. That's where I read Fahrenheit 451. That's where I read The White Mountains. And there were a bunch of others. And I love that because I love sci-fi, and I love what is it? I love a lot of those dystopian stories. So 1984 and Brave New World definitely appeal to me in a big way. Why did the chat just shoot all the way back up to the top here? I hate that. Uh, the, Sorry, I missed what a bunch of you said because the chat just shot back up to the top for some reason. Ravander is saying, like me, the teacher was all, you read too much, just choose some book from this or that genre. I like that. Yeah. I can't say that my school ever had a problem with reading too much, mostly because people in my school had to be dragged kicking and screaming into reading. And I read a lot of stuff on my own, but I would always try to read the assigned books too. But I always found that like what I was reading on my own was way more interesting than what was being assigned to me. Um, and and so I found like, and that's probably why I didn't really get into certain books, because I was reading something else at the same time that I found far more interesting. I know that definitely happened with Old Man in the Sea. Um, and now everybody's talking about 1984, which, again, is one of my favorites. because it was just amazing. It was an amazing look at what the future could be, and yes, it was very bleak, and it didn't have a lot of hope, but at the same time it was fascinating, and for the most part I felt like kind of a cautionary tale, and I think that's what a lot of people sort of miss nowadays, is that they sort of look at 1984 as this sort of quaint thing that is more parody now than anything else. But I thought it was a very strong cautionary tale about government overreach, and where it could eventually lead. And I think that I think it's a very important book to read, just to sort of keep you thinking. So, and yeah, Fahrenheit, and Fahrenheit 451 was actually the first Ray Bradbury book I ever read, and again, it was a fascinating, excuse me, it was a fascinating story. It was also at the same time I felt like super tragic, because it's all about people burning books, and about one, and the thing I loved about this book, about Fahrenheit 451, was the irony that the firemen were now the ones setting fires rather than putting them out. They were going house to house with flamethrowers to basically burn any books that people might have. And I thought that was an interesting turnabout. I loved the idea that no matter how much you try to push society in a certain way, there's going to be a certain level of pushback, and sometimes it really does win the day. Well, I don't know if you can really say that in Fahrenheit 451 they won the day, but they worked hard, and that's what I liked about it. Like they understood the importance of reading. They understood the importance of books. And that's why I like Fahrenheit 451, because that was me. Like I really feel strongly about the importance of reading, and the importance of getting caught up in a story and getting caught up in words on a page. And so that really sort of that was really compelling to me. And Temple was saying, I was really moved at the end of the book by the people who devoted their lives to memorizing one book so they wouldn't be lost. Yeah. Definitely. So, let's go back here. I'm trying to think of some of the other books that I read in school that really stuck with me. The one that really stuck with me when I was a kid, and I think I mentioned this at some point on like one of those books that stay with you memes on Facebook, was Bridge to Terabithia. I don't know how many of you have read that one, but that one really like spoke to me in a way that I actually was not expecting. Because it's about a friendship between a boy and a girl. The girl is very much a free spirit kind of character, and she's very much in her own head, and she pulls him along into these wild adventures that they go into, and they have their own special secret place out in the woods where they create these fantastical tales for each other. But at the same time, there's this real world aspect that keeps encroaching on them, and eventually drives them apart, and to a very tragic conclusion, which I won't spoil if you haven't read. but I really that one really spoke to me because I really loved the idea of the power of imagination. I've always loved that concept of imagination can just take you to various different places, and it's not just like some abstract idea, but it's something very real. And I thought that Bridge to Terabithia really did a good job with that, like showing just like how immersive a child's imagination can be. And Aravandi is saying, I saw the movie Bridge to Terabithia and I liked it until the girl, spoilers. Yeah. I didn't care for the movie too much, because they they made the girl in it like too wild and too out there and not as grounded. And like I like the idea that there was like some sort of grounding to her in the book. Light of the King is saying, sorry, a little late today. That's okay, you're here, welcome. Yeah, Rocket Hobbit is saying, always meant to read the book after seeing the movie, but it was so sad. And I'm not going to lie, yes, it is sad. The ending is quite sad, and I would say, and I don't know if it's because they characterized everything so differently in the movie, and they took a lot of nuance out of the story in the movie, and I don't know if that's why in the book the ending affected me a lot more deeply than in the movie. And it's also possible because I had read the book. In the movie, I saw that ending coming, or I knew it was ultimately going to happen. But regardless, I would say I find the book far superior to the movie. Let's see here. Yoko Mickelson put up a big post here. Let's see if I can get through this whole thing. Tamara Pierce's books for sure, although it was first when I was a teenager that I discovered them at my school library, but they also have a very special place in my heart, along with, oh god, I'm not going to be able to pronounce this right, Lene Cabaral's fantastic books, and Astrid Lindgren, which I've never heard of. And this is Rovandir. Okay, then hello. This is Rovandir's book. Maybe you can help enlighten me on some of this, because a lot of these I haven't read. Hans Christian Andersen's The Ugly Duckling still stays with me. Of course, I have read that one. Yes. We didn't read much other than fantasy books and adventures in schools I've been at. So it's basically the kind of books that got stuck with me. And not to forget to mention The Diary of Anne Frank. And yeah, that's a mainstay, but an important one. And wow, looking at this, I feel I've jabbered on about too many books and authors. I don't believe that comics count as actual books. Now that I don't agree with. I think comics are just as legitimate a storytelling device as anything else, and I would like to do some shows about comics and graphic novels at some point, because I do think that there is a place for them, and I do think that they are very very important and worth looking at. But Richard and Wendy Peeney's ElfQuest series, I also got to know through my schools, and they have meant a lot to me through the years. That and Gene M. All's Earth's children's books. Never read those. I mean, of course, I read Diary of Anne Frank a long time ago, and it's one I do want to revisit. And apparently, what was his name? Astrid Lindgren wrote the Pippi Longstocking books. Okay, now those I know. I didn't realize that was the writer of Pippi Longstocking, because I know Pippi Longstocking mostly through movies and TV shows. And I always liked that series, but I never actually read the books themselves. I might have to give that a shot. Um, and so now everybody is talking about Pippi Longstocking. um, and yeah, I remember a lot of my friends dressing up as Pippi Longstocking for Halloween. Wait, there's a movie adaptation of The Wind in the Willows with the characters as humans? What? Is that for real? I hope not. That's awful. Um, Aravandi says, I had a friend in school that was nicknamed Pippi Longstocking because of her hair. Yeah, I remember being fascinated by Pippi Longstocking because she was like this this character who was so full of adventure and had like all these crazy stories that she would tell, and you were never sure um if she was telling the truth or if she was lying, and it almost didn't really matter too much. um uh Ravander is saying of her stories, Rania Robber's Daughter and Mio My Mio is my faves. I have not heard of either of those. Um, I'm gonna have to check that out. And yeah, the idea of a Wind in the Willows movie with human characters is just all sorts of wrong. And with Mark Gatiss and Matt Lucas, I expect better from those guys. Oh. Yeah. We do have a very strong Scandinavian contingent, I think, here. So there are lots of books that I've never heard of that were apparently mainstays over there, and now I want to check them out. Paul Mercy says Daddy Longlegs is another favorite of mine. I've never heard. Daddy Longlegs sounds familiar, but I don't know why. And so I'm gonna have to look into that. You all are giving me lots of books, more books that I need to read. And I've already got a huge list of books that I need to read. So so what were some of the others that I really liked growing up? So I'm curious for some of you to talk about some of the books you didn't like, and we've talked a little bit about that. There were certain books that I clearly did not like. I would think the ones that stuck with me because I didn't like them were The Great Gatsby, Catcher in the Rye, and Old Man in the Sea. Temple is saying, I kept all of my lists of recommended high school reading that I got in school. Cool. Alan is saying, here's one. I read Faust 1 and 2 in school. That's another one. I've never read Faust. And again, it was not something that I felt would appeal to me, but I probably should have. Let's see, Aravandi saying, I also hated Julius Caesar. It was depressing. I will have to I have to agree with you on that, because I never really liked I like the history of Julius Caesar, but I felt that Shakespeare's version of it was so melodramatic Um, but I just I didn't care for it too much. It's definitely not one of my favorites of his. Um, Temple is saying hated Tessa of Dubervilles and Brave New World. Now, Brave New World, I did like as a concept. I didn't think it was as strong as, like, say, 1984. And I have yet to see any good film adaptation of it. Um, oh, God. The comments are going so fast, I can't see. Let's say Light of the King is saying, I didn't like a lot of the existentialist writers that I had to read in high school. I had to read The Stranger by Camus in French for my French class. It was depressing. Yeah. Ava is saying, I read Crime and Punishment, but must say it was a bit of a chore to read. Aravandi says, in case you haven't noticed, I don't like depressing books. And I'm right there with you, Aravandi. I like stories that have a positive message, and that's sort of where, like, I mean, you can have, like, you can have drama and depressing stuff in it, but I like a book to have a positive message at the end. And Temple is saying, if any of you guys know Garrison Keillor, he did something called the 5 Songs of Shakespeare. They're so funny, I recommend finding them and listening to them. I'm gonna have to check that out. I do love Garrison Keillor. I listen to Prairie Home Companion almost every week because I'm that much of a dork. And I've missed a whole bunch of stuff here. So I think Ravander was saying that she was actually in A Midsummer Night's Dream. Am I reading that right? Let's see, a fairy thing. I can't remember exactly the role. Just remember I had to sing a donkey head guy to sleep. Yeah, I was. And Temple says, so you were maybe Peas Blossom. That sounds probably, yeah, that sounds right. Rocket Hobbit says, I was introduced to Shakespeare when I was in my mid-teens. Really enjoyed Midsummer Night's Dream and Henry V. Henry V I absolutely love. Mostly because of the St. Crispin's Day speech, which is one of my all-time favorite Shakespeare speeches. But I really liked A Midsummer Night's Dream, and I was in, like, an excerpt of that in high school. We had to do the last bit of the play within a play at the end of Midsummer Night's Dream, and if I remember correctly, I was playing Theseus. And what's so funny is, like, we worked so hard on it that, like, I still remember, like, bits and pieces of the dialogue even now. And, like, when they put out a movie of Midsummer Night's Dream about 10 years ago, I think, maybe more, with Kevin Kline, Michelle Pfeiffer, and Stanley Tucci, and just a big all-star cast, and it was really good. And yeah, and then when that scene came up, like, I was pretty much, like, mouthing along with the whole bit. Let's see. Ava is saying, has anyone read Anna Karenina? I have not. Mostly because I've been intimidated by it. I should. Henry V was so good, done as the Hollow Crown with Tom Hiddleston. Ooh, yeah. Tom Hiddleston as Henry V, is that what you're saying, Light of the King? I need to check that one out. Let's see. Temple is saying, my favorite Shakespeare plays were Lear, Othello, Twelfth Night. I hated Shrew, but I think the best versions of Shrew was 10 Things I Hate About You. Yeah. Now, I do love both Taming of the Shrew and 10 Things I Hate About You. Just because they're they're such fun. It's such a fun play, and like my favorite version of Shakespeare is when he's having fun. Um, Much Ado About Nothing is probably one of my all-time favorites, um, because it you can tell everybody's having fun, and I like that about that. And that isn't to say that I don't like stuff like Hamlet. I love Hamlet. I love Henry V. I like some of the good heavy stuff, but when he's doing lighthearted, it's really a lot of fun. Um, let's see. Temple says Shrew really has to be performed just right, or the end falls flat for me. I totally agree with you there. Aravandi says my university has a summer Shakespeare program, and they did Shrew last year, but I didn't get to see it. Oh, I'm sorry. Hopefully you'll be able to see it again, or at least some version of it, because it is a fun play, and somehow we have been talking about Shakespeare. Um, so what are some of the others? I wanted to talk a little bit about the sci-fi unit that I had in sixth grade, because that one just stuck with me so much. Um, because like I was in school at a time where teachers didn't really have like very strict rules for how they had to teach a class, or which stories they had to assign. And so my one English teacher in sixth grade, he was a big sci-fi fan, and he said, well, you know what, I'm going to take all my students along for this ride, and assigned us nothing but sci-fi books for a year or for a semester. And I loved it. Some of the stories that I read that really stuck with me were The White Mountains, which if you haven't read that, I do highly recommend it. It's a sci-fi story about a very insidious kind of alien invasion. I don't want to talk too much about it, just because I don't want to spoil anything, but it's a fantastic read, and I highly recommend it. Um, and some of the other books I read, I talked about Fahrenheit 451, um, which I loved. I also loved 1984, which we talked about. One of the things that I really appreciated about this unit was the passion that my teacher brought into it when we were discussing these books, and it got us into it, and that's why I loved that. That sort of solidified my love for sci-fi, because it was really cool seeing a teacher get into the stories and not just sort of teach it by rote, but like really get into it and get excited about it, and therefore make all the other students excited about it. And Rocket Hobbit says Bradbury has been and always will be my absolute fave. And I can't disagree with you there, Rocket. I had the pleasure of meeting Ray Bradbury a couple of times at the LA Fair, or at the LA County Book Fair, and he was always the sweetest guy. He was always very appreciative of people who read and enjoyed his books, and so to find out that he was like not just a great writer but also a really great man, really really just sort of solidified my admiration for him. So, yeah, yes, Rocket. Yes, I met Ray Bradbury, and yeah, it was like you know how they say never meet your heroes because they'll disappoint you. Ray Bradbury was not one of those people. He, if anything, just solidified why he was my hero. And Temple says Bradbury wasn't afraid to get into some really odd and creative concepts. That's very true, and in fact, I'm reading a book of his right now. I'm not going to say which one, just because it's going to be a book of the month for later on. But I'm really enjoying it, and it was one that I read when I was much younger, and I'm rereading it now, and I find it's a lot more different now. But it's, I would say, even better now. But again, we'll get to that when it's time for when it's time to talk about it. Light of the King says, "Sorry, I missed how you met him. I met him when he was at the LA Times Book Fair. Because he was a regular there. He would always go there, and that's how I met him. Just he was at a booth doing a signing and didn't really have a lot of people around there, so I just walked up and said hi. And he was a wonderful human being. Rocket is saying, I always think it must be strange to meet writers after being a fan of their work. Yes and no. Like, one of the things, and this is like something that I've always just kept in mind when talking with anybody who I admire, is just that they are human beings too. And trying to keep that at the forefront of my brain. Like, they're not supernatural beings. They're just people like you and me, and they appreciate a compliment as much as the next person. And Temple says you get the chance to be in their heads, and then all of a sudden you're confronted with just a person. And I guess it's like it can be a little jarring, but at the same time, it's always best to just sort of keep that in your head. Another example I'll give you was another writer who I used to admire, not so much now, and that is Orson Scott Card. Now, when I was in high school, I read Ender's Game and absolutely loved it. It still stands up as one of my favorite books. And I went to a conference in the mid '90s or so, and it was a conference about Tolkien, and Orson Scott Card was there as the guest of honor because he had just written his own audio drama adaptation of The Lord of the Rings, and was premiering it there. Rocket Hobbit is saying, the Scientologist. Are you talking about Orson Scott Card? Because he's actually a Mormon. But back then, he was a nice man, and it was fun to talk with him. Later on, he kind of went off the deep end, and I have lost all respect for him as a person. But there was a time when he wrote really great fiction, and I can never deny that. And it certainly doesn't make me love Ender's Game any less. I won't pick up any new copies of it. I won't pick up anything new written by him. But when I met him before all that, he was actually a very nice person. He was a very passionate person. And I kind of am disappointed about where he finally ended up. Temple is saying, has anyone watched The Prophets of Science Fiction by Ridley Scott? It was a series about different influential sci-fi writers. It's pretty interesting. I wish they continued the series. I've heard of that. Um, I need to check to see if that's on Netflix. Um, a number of people have recommended that to me. The Prophets of Science Fiction. I definitely need to check that one out. And Rocket is saying, I'm just thinking of the L. Ron Hubbard winning awards thing where he was always a guest. He's still not a nice guy, to put it mildly. Now, this is true. L. Ron Hubbard was his own brand of crazy, and I will even say it, not even that good a sci-fi writer. I read Battlefield Earth, and I didn't like it. I've read... I've never been impressed with L. Ron Hubbard, either as a person or as a writer. Again, that's my opinion. Temple says it is available on Instant View, The Prophets of Sci-Fi. Okay, cool. I'm definitely going to have to check that out. I might check it out as soon as I'm done this show. Yes. So what are some of the other things that have been going on the Twitter and the Facebook? I think we've gone through most of them at this point. Let's see. There were a number of books on here that I had never heard of, let alone read. So I might have to look into these. And of course, like, somehow I missed the boat on A Wrinkle in Time, and I feel like I should pick that up again. I should pick that up and read it. For whatever reason, that one was never assigned to me in school. Even though, like, many of my classmates got it. I was just never in the right English class for it. Let's see here. Rovandir has given a lot of recommendations that I'm definitely going to have to check out. This one by Helen Rogers. I was lucky I had an English teacher that brought books to life. My favorite was My Family and Other Animals by Gerald Durrell. A brilliantly funny book. He was such a wonderful teacher, I can't think of one I didn't enjoy. I've never heard of that one. I'm going to have to check that one out. Temple says, strangely enough, I tend to have a hard time with Dickens. I love movies and series based on his works, but I struggle with reading his books. I don't hate his writing, but I get kind of distracted when reading his works. Victor Hugo, too. Well, it's writing from a different time, and I totally understand that. It does sort of take a lot of... It takes a bit of readjustment in your own brain. And sometimes it can be distracting. I found audiobooks help with that if you're having trouble with that. And a lot of stuff by Dickens and Victor Hugo you can find for free on LibriVox.org. Usually very well read stuff too. So I would recommend checking that out. Aravandi is saying, I'm not sure if I've read Dickens or not. I've definitely read A Christmas Carol. I don't think I've read too much else. But I'm getting into LibriVox stuff now, which is great because it's all public domain books. So anything Dickens, Hugo. I just finished reading Frankenstein just recently, and that was really good. Oh god, everything's going so fast now. There was one up here that I wanted to check out, but I can't. Oh, I Stole the One Ring says, the book that sticks in my head is Huckleberry Finn. Now, I am going to talk about Huckleberry Finn at some point, but not this week, because I want to do another episode on banned books. And Huckleberry Finn is definitely one of the more famous banned books out there. So, as much as I want to talk about it, I don't want to do it this week. Temple is saying, I love how many books are available in public domain for free in ebook format. I want to read more Jules Verne. Absolutely. I love Jules Verne. An interesting one of his was actually his Lost book. I think it's called Paris in the 20th Century, which came out probably about 15, 20 years ago, posthumously. And I thought it was an interesting, like, Jules Verne was a visionary, like, beyond visionary. Like, he could see our world the way it is today long before it was ever anything like that. And that book definitely showcases a lot of things, like how did he even think that we would get to that point technologically when the world around him was nothing like that. But it's very visionary. The story itself, not very engaging, but still a fascinating way to see how his brain worked. Light of the King says, loved in Back to the Future 3 when Doc named his kids Jules and Vern. Well, that was how he and what's her name sort of bonded over their love of Jules Verne. And yeah, I thought that was a cute touch. And I love Back to the Future 3. I think probably an underrated sequel. I thought it was very well done. But yeah, Jules Verne is a great writer, great author, definitely worth reading. And again, I need to read more of his stuff. And like I said, I just finished reading Frankenstein last week for the first time, by the way. For some reason, I had never read it before then, and I will talk about that next month. I'm doing a lot of prep work right now for October because October is going to be my favorite. It's I'm going to be doing horror month, and it's my favorite time of year. It's some of my favorite genres. So I'm doing a lot of research, a lot of reading, trying to get some people on the show to talk about it. So yeah, October is going to be fun, at least for me. It may not be for you, but this is my show. Light of the King says, I love time travel stories. I want someone to do a time travel story in the theme of Blade Runner. Interesting. Aravandi says, horror month runs and hides. Well, I'm not going to be scaring you with talking about horror. At least I hope not. Rocket is saying, get Kelly again. I missed her last time. Well, you can watch the archive of it, Rocket. Aonway is saying, one of my favorites is Dracula. I don't want to talk too much about Dracula yet. I have my own opinions about it. So we'll get to that next month. Rocket Hobbit, Stephen King. Yes, finally something I can ramble properly about. Okay, then we'll have a lot to talk about, Rocket, because I am a huge Stephen King fan. I've read almost everything by him. So, but that's not till October, so I don't want to get too much into it yet. Temple is saying, I watched The Shining the other day. That movie still stands the test of time. Again, I have certain strong opinions about The Shining that I'll probably get into next month. I will say... I will say that The Shining, the movie, I would say it's more of a Stanley Kubrick movie than it is a Stephen King movie. And that's probably the most diplomatic way I can explain my opinions. But yeah. Rocket is saying, actually never seen the movie. Book freaked me out though. Yeah, the book is freaky and the movie is freaky too, but both in their own very distinct ways. But again, I'll save that for later. Rocket is saying, I heard Stephen King didn't like the adaptation, so I've kept my distance. Rocket, saying that Stephen King didn't like the adaptation is putting it mildly. But yeah, okay, I'm going to table this conversation for next month. I'm shutting up about The Shining. I'm shutting up about Stephen King. So we're coming up on an hour here, and since it's just me, and this has kind of been all over the place as far as like conversation goes. We've talked about a lot of different books, not many in great detail, unfortunately. And there are clearly many of these that I haven't read that I need to. And so my to read list has just gotten a lot longer. So expect a more in-depth discussion on all these books next year. Yeah, save the scary for next month. I will say that I have a couple things in mind that I'm trying to pull off in addition to the show for October for Horror Month that I don't want to talk about in too much detail on whether or not I will be able to do it. Light of the King is asking, will you cancel the show on the 21st because of the Baggins picnic? I actually... I'm trying to figure out a way to do the show from the Baggins picnic on the 21st. But we'll see. I'll let you know as we get closer to it. So Paul Mercier is saying, this has been great. I'm so sad I missed the James Herriot talk, one of my favorites. I'm sorry you missed it too, but if you can still watch the archive of it. Light of the King says, I will be there, but not until like 2 p.m. That's usually when most people show up, so don't worry. And if I can pull it off, we may just broadcast through the whole picnic, so like all 6 hours of it. We'll see. So, yeah, I'm going to bring this to a close for this week. I'm sorry that things have been kind of all over the place with this one, and the discussion was kind of like crazy and all over the place. But there were a lot of books to talk about, and I only have an hour to talk about all of them. So, Rocket is asking, will anyone be streaming the Baggins party? Justin, maybe. That's the person I need to talk to about that. I know that we did stream 2 years ago. Yeah. So hopefully we can talk Justin into doing it again this year. And Arabandi saying, We've been talkative today. Yes, we have. And it's been hard for me to keep up with the chat, and I do apologize if I missed any comments. Things were going by very quickly. So for next week, we're going to be talking about banned books. All those books that for some reason or another were never assigned in schools, usually were controversial in some way, whether or not that controversy was founded, whether or not books should be banned, and what your opinions are on that. So I'd love to get your opinions on that. I'm going to be going through a list of some of the various banned books out there. Of course, Huck Finn, really, really well known for being a banned book, so we'll be talking about that next week. And Temple is saying, one of my favorite topics is banned books. Yes, like the book Thief. So yeah, that's going to be next week. So if there are any banned books out there that you feel were undeserved, or that you really enjoyed, like, definitely post them to Facebook or to Twitter, or email me about them. I'd love to get your opinions on that. And always saying, thanks so much for this trip down literary memory lane. That is a beautiful way of putting it, Aeon Way. I'm definitely going to use that. So yeah. So thank you again. And next week we'll be talking banned books. And again, the book of the month for September is The Giver by Lois Lowry. Check it out. I think you'll really enjoy it. I did. And I will see you all next week, and never stop reading.